On a dusty stretch of Route 66 in New Mexico, the sun burned low and heavy, turning the horizon into shimmering gold as 27-year-old Jake Turner wiped the sweat from his forehead. His shirt was stained with grease, his jeans sun-faded, and his boots patched more times than he could count. Jake lived in a tiny rented trailer behind the old gas station where he worked barely enough space for a bed, toolbox, and the quiet loneliness that filled his nights. But Jake was the kind of man who kept going. His hands were steady even when life wasn't, and every bolt he tightened, every engine he revived felt like a small promise that tomorrow could still be good. Somehow, late that afternoon, just as Jake was cleaning his tools, a deep rumble echoed across the quiet desert road. A motorcycle matte black, sleek but clearly wounded rolled unevenly toward his shop. The engine sputtered like an exhausted animal before it finally coughed to silence. Dust swirled around it like a slow-motion storm. A woman swung one leg over the bike and stepped off with worn confidence. She removed her helmet, revealing a streak of silver running through her dark hair, catching the sun like a blade. Torn jeans, leather boots, a jacket covered in road dust, she looked like she'd ridden through storms and didn't mind one more. "Hey," she said, voice steady but tired. "My bike kinda died on me." Jake looked up, meeting her eyes. Something about her struck him immediately, not beauty, though she had plenty of that, but a loneliness buried deep, like she'd ridden thousands of miles hoping to outrun it. She tried to look casual, but Jake could see the exhaustion in her shoulders. "Let me take a look," he replied, offering her a small, genuine smile. Unlike most people she met on the road, his smile didn't carry an angle or expectation. It was simply kind, and for reasons she couldn't explain, it made her stay right where she was. Jake crouched beside the bike, fingers moving with practiced ease. He checked the wiring, the plugs, the coil. Within minutes, he sighed softly. "Ignition coil's failing," he said, "not completely dead," but soon she watched him, fascinated not by the repair, but by how gently he worked, like every machine deserved respect. "Can you fix it?" she asked. "I can try," Jake replied. "Got some old parts in the back. If they fit, you'll be good to go." She nodded, relieved, but inside, something more complicated tugged at her. This man didn't look at her the way others did, didn't stare too long, didn't try to impress her, he just helped. She stood near the open garage door, arms crossed, watching the desert sky turn orange. For months, she had crossed states with that bike, searching for something she wasn't sure she could name. Freedom, peace, herself, maybe all of them. But this shop felt different, alive with the scent of motor oil, old country music humming on a dusty radio, and a mechanic who didn't ask questions. "Thanks for doing this," she said softly. Jake glanced over his shoulder. "Hey, everyone needs help sometimes," he replied, and he meant it. No judgment, no suspicion, just kindness. She wasn't used to that. In her world, trust was currency, rare, precious, and often stolen. Her real name was Riley Morgan, billionaire, tech legend, heiress to one of the biggest private companies in America. Her face appeared in business magazines, investor panels, and celebrity pages, always perfect, polished, unreachable. But the woman standing in Jake's shop was nothing like the woman the world believed her to be. Out here, she was simply Riley, a drifter with a bike, a past she didn't talk about, and a heart tired of being hunted for money, power, or access. She had cut off her team, shut down her schedule, and disappeared onto the road with only a backpack and her bike. And for the first time in her life, she could breathe. Jake didn't know any of that. When he returned with a used ignition coil and a small tray of tools, he only saw a traveler in trouble. He knelt beside the bike again, hands steady even as the heat pushed sweat down his neck. Riley crouched next to him, watching closely. "You always work out here alone?" she asked. "Yeah," he answered lightly. "Town's small, not many customers, but engines don't mind the silence." She smiled at that soft, genuine, the kind of smile that hadn't touched her lips in months. "You must like it here," she said. Jake shrugged. "It's quiet, and quiet's better than other things." He didn't explain what other things meant. She didn't ask. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the shop floor as Jake reassembled the bike. Riley held a flashlight for him, and their hands brushed once, just a brief touch, but warm enough to feel like a spark, unexpected and real. Riley felt her chest tighten. She wasn't supposed to feel anything. She wasn't supposed to connect. She wasn't supposed to let a stranger in. But Jake Turner, with his rough hands and gentle eyes, made it feel effortless. When he finally stood, wiping his hands on a rag, he gave a small nod. "Try it now." Riley swung her leg over the bike and pressed the ignition. The engine growled back to life, strong, smooth, revived. Her eyes widened. "You fixed it," she whispered. "Told you I'd try," he said, smiling. The engine idled perfectly, humming in the quiet evening. Riley lowered her helmet slowly, but didn't put it on. "Not yet. How much do I owe you?" she asked. Jake waved a dismissive hand. "Don't worry about it." She blinked. "No, really, what's the cost?" "You needed help," he said simply. "That's all." Riley stared at him, speechless. No one refused her money, ever. No one treated her like a person, a real person who didn't need to be impressed or courted or exploited. She opened her mouth to protest, but Jake shook his head gently. It's fine. Just be safe out there. Roads get rough at night. The concern in his voice was so honest that it struck her deeper than she expected. Riley looked at him for a long moment, the desert wind brushing her hair. She could have ridden away. She should have ridden away. But something in her refused. Maybe it was the kindness, maybe the quiet, maybe the man who looked at her like she belonged on this earth rather than on magazine covers. Do you mind if I stay a little? She asked, surprising herself. Jake shrugged. Not at all. I've got coffee inside. Nothing fancy, but strong enough to keep a trucker awake. Riley laughed softly, the sound unfamiliar even to her own ears. She followed him inside the small worn-out shop office lit by a single yellow bulb, and as the night settled over Route 66, the billionaire no one recognized and the mechanic who owned nothing shared the first quiet moment of something neither of them saw coming. Riley sat on an overturned crate outside Jake's shop, her fingers wrapped around the cold soda can he'd handed her without a second thought. The sun had dipped low, leaving streaks of red and gold across the desert sky. She looked around the little mechanic shop, rusty metal signs, stacks of old tires, a dusty floor that creaked with every step. Yet somehow, this place felt more peaceful than the vast mansions she owned in Los Angeles, New York, and Miami. She breathed slowly, letting the quiet settle into her bones. For the first time in years, no cameras, assistants, or bodyguards hovered behind her. Just the hum of cicadas, the far-off whistle of the wind, and Jake Turner moving around his tools like he had all the time in the world. She didn't know why, but being here felt right, like she'd stumbled upon something rare and fragile. Jake worked steadily beside her, his focus locked on the engine. He wasn't a man who filled silence with pointless chatter. He spoke when needed, moved with intention, and carried a kind of calm strength Riley rarely saw in her world. Most of the men she met, investors, tech founders, CEOs, talked too much and listened too little. Jake wasn't like them. At one point, he glanced her way. You ride alone, a lot? He asked, his voice gentle, careful not to pry too deeply. Riley nodded slowly. Yeah, she said, tracing her finger along the can's rim. You could say I'm searching for something. Jake paused, mid-turn of a wrench. A place, he asked. She hesitated. Her throat tightened just a little. More like a person. Their eyes met his, calm and warm, hers filled with things she couldn't say. Jake didn't ask for more. He simply nodded, accepting her answer without pressing. That alone made her want to tell him everything. But she held her breath, held her secrets, held her name. Out here, she didn't want to be Riley Morgan, the woman whose face was on tech billboards, whose company shaped half the digital world, whose fortune made people act strange. Out here, she just wanted to exist. Jake continued, tightening the last bolt, wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. The desert breeze ruffled his hair, and the warm glow of sunset lit his profile. He looked real, present, uncomplicated, for someone like her who grew up surrounded by polished lies that felt like magic. She watched him in silence, her heart beating slower, steadier. Finally, Jake stepped back from the bike and exhaled. You're good to go, he said, wiping his hands on a rag as if the job meant nothing special. But to Riley, it meant everything. She stood and reached for her wallet. I want to pay you for the part and the work, she insisted. Jake shook his head immediately. Don't worry about it. She frowned, gently but firmly pushing the bills toward him. Please, this is your livelihood. Jake stepped back again, raising both hands in a soft refusal. Really? Keep it. Riley blinked in disbelief. Almost no one ever refused her money. People usually bent over backward for a chance to earn a fragment of her attention, much less her cash. But Jake, he refused it like it meant nothing to him, like she meant more than the bills in her hand. She tried again. Jake, I insist. He smiled, small, warm, and stubborn. And I'm still not taking it. She stared at him, heat prickling behind her eyes. Not sadness, not joy, just shock. You look like you've been on the road a while, Jake said gently. You'll need it more than me. Riley swallowed hard. That sentence, simple, soft, sincere, hit her deeper than she expected. So few people in her life cared whether she kept or lost anything. Most only cared about what she could give them. But Jake cared about her keeping what she had. Her throat tightened, and she had to look away. Jake didn't seem to notice the emotional earthquake he'd caused in her. He simply walked over to the fridge, grabbed another soda, and held it out to her. Want a refill? He asked casually. That simple act nearly broke her. She chuckled softly, feeling warmth rise in her chest. Sure, she said. She sat back down on the crate, and he leaned against the garage door frame, sipping from his own can. A comfortable silence settled between them, the kind that felt like a blanket rather than a wall. Riley found herself studying him, the quiet confidence, the way he listened more than he spoke, the gentleness hidden beneath rough hands. She wanted to know who he was when he wasn't fixing engines. Jake Turner, she began, tapping her can lightly. What's your story? He chuckled softly. Not much to tell. Small town guy, grew up around cars. Life didn't go the way I planned. But I'm still rolling. Her smile softened. That sounds like a story to me. He shrugged. Maybe someday. There was something in his voice, something heavy, unresolved, but he masked it with calm. Riley didn't push. Just like he hadn't pushed her, the desert wind drifted across the gas station, rattling an old metal sign. A few cars passed on the distant road, their headlights streaking across the twilight like restless stars. Riley imagined what Jake would think if he knew the truth. If he knew that the calm drifter sitting in front of him had built a billion-dollar empire that she'd spent years hiding from the world she created. Nessie had walked away from meetings worth millions just to breathe open air again. People always looked at her differently when they learned her name, but Jake was the first person in a long time who looked at her like she was human. Can I ask you something? Riley said softly. Sure, Jake answered. If you could leave this place, would you? He looked surprised by the question, then thoughtful, then quietly honest. Yay, he whispered. One day, but life doesn't just let you go sometimes. Her heart tightened again. She understood that more than he knew. Life hadn't let her go, either not from responsibilities, expectations, loneliness, or the constant fear of being loved for the wrong reasons. Before she could respond, Jake tilted his chin toward her. What about you? What are you running from? Riley froze. The question hit close to close. But Jake didn't ask it like a challenge. He asked it like a man who truly wanted to understand. So she whispered, people. That bad? He asked softly. That complicated, she said. Their eyes held for a long moment. The desert wind carrying secrets neither dared to say aloud. She stood up slowly, brushing dust from her jeans. I should head out, she said weakly, though every part of her wished she didn't have to. Jake nodded, walking her to the bike. Where are you headed? He asked. She shrugged. Not sure. Just wherever the road feels right. Jake smiled, something warm flickering in his eyes. Then I hope the road's kind to you. Riley put her helmet on but hesitated before lowering the visor. Jake, thank you for everything. He laughed lightly. I didn't do much. You did more than you think, she whispered. She started the bike, the engine roaring to life, strong, steady, ready to run again. But she didn't drive off. Not yet. She looked at him one last time, this broke mechanic with the soul of a man far richer than anyone she knew. She felt something pull inside her, something soft and terrifying, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. And then, with her heart pounding in her chest, Riley Morgan, billionaire, runaway, drifter rode off into the darkening horizon, leaving behind the only man who had seen her without knowing who she was, and the only man she secretly hoped she would see again. The sky over Route 66 shifted into deep shades of orange, gold, and rose as the sun dipped toward the distant mesas. Riley should have left hours ago, but something in Jake's quiet strength kept her rooted. She leaned against her bike, chewing her lip before finally asking, would you want to ride for a bit? Not far, just the road. Jake blinked in surprise. No one ever invited him anywhere, especially not someone like her. Still, something in her voice, soft and hopeful, tugged at him. Yeah, he said, grabbing his own helmet. Could use a break. They set off together, engines rumbling like two wandering hearts finding the same rhythm. The heat softened into warm desert wind, brushing against their jackets as they rolled across the open stretch. For the first time in months, Jake felt free, truly free, with someone beside him who didn't expect anything from him except presence. Riley rode with a looseness she hadn't felt in years, the kind that came only when she wasn't being photographed, watched, or judged. Her laugh spilled into the wind, pure, unpolished, real. Jake glanced at her from time to time, seeing the way the fading sunlight caught the silver streak in her hair. She didn't look like a billionaire now. She looked like a soul unburdened for the first time in a long time. They rode until the world dimmed into twilight, where only the hum of their engines and the rustle of desert brush kept them company. With every mile, Riley's tension melted. She had spent years escaping crowded rooms and suffocating expectations, thinking the endless road would fix her loneliness. But today, riding next to a humble mechanic who didn't know her fortune or fame, she felt something she didn't know she'd been missing: connection. They finally stopped at a secluded overlook, one of those quiet places where the world felt too big, too beautiful to rush through. The sky deepened into indigo, stars emerging slowly like secrets revealed one at a time. Riley cut her engine and slid off her bike, lifting her helmet and taking in a long breath of cooling desert air. Jake joined her, leaning casually against his motorcycle. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full, warm, comforting. Jake, Riley began softly, her voice trembling just a little. You treated me differently than anyone has in a long time. He frowned gently. How's that? She looked at him, searching his expression. Like a person, not like someone useful, not like someone expensive. Her words cracked at the edges, revealing far more truth than she planned to share. Jake stared at her for a moment, surprised by the vulnerability she allowed him to see. He didn't know who she was, at least, not the billionaire part, but he knew she carried an ache that ran deeper than the road behind her. He kicked a rock gently and looked at the stars above them. Everyone deserves kindness, he said, his voice low and steady. Doesn't matter where they're going or where they come from. Riley swallowed hard. Those words shouldn't have hit so deeply, but they did. She had money, influence, power, yet none of it ever earned her genuine kindness. She wrapped her arms around herself to hide the shiver that wasn't from the cold. The desert wind blew softly, stirring her hair as if encouraging her to speak again, to share the truth she never shared with anyone who might use it. I've been on the road for weeks, Riley admitted, sitting down on a warm rock near the overlook's edge. Not to travel, to run. Jake sat beside her without hesitation. From what? She hesitated, fingers tracing patterns in the sand. People who only want what I can give them, not who I am. Jake nodded slowly, understanding even without knowing her identity. That's a hard kind of lonely. Riley exhaled shakily. Yeah, harder than I expected. The honesty in his tone, the lack of judgment, made her chest tighten. She'd crossed states trying to find peace and instead found a mechanic with dirt on his jeans and compassion in his voice. The irony wasn't lost on her. The wind picked up, brushing against their shoulders. Riley turned slightly and saw Jake watching the horizon. Not her, not studying her, not calculating her worth, just being there. That simple steadiness felt like a gift she didn't know she needed. Do you always help strangers like this? She asked, smiling softly. Jake shrugged. Someone helped me once when I had nothing. Never forgot it. Figured I'd pass it on. Riley felt her heart tug, unexpectedly strong. That's rare, she murmured. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. Not really. Good people are out there. Just quiet about it. His humility was disarming, almost unbelievable in its purity. Her eyes softened as she watched him. She had met CEOs, founders, geniuses, but none had ever made her feel this safe. Stars multiplied overhead, shimmering like scattered diamonds across the navy sky. The world around them felt suspended. No deadlines, no weight, no responsibilities. Just two souls, sharing a single breath of peace. Jake shifted slightly, and his arm brushed hers. Riley didn't move away. This is the first time I haven't felt alone, she whispered. Jake looked at her with a gentleness that warmed her from the inside. You're not alone right now, he said. The words wrapped around her like a promise. They stood there, shoulders brushing, breaths sinking, hearts thumping with something unspoken but unmistakable. The distance between them shrank, not physically, but emotionally, like two stories beginning to intertwine. For a moment, Riley stepped closer, her presence warm and delicate beside him. She wasn't a billionaire now. Just a woman who had been searching for someone who saw her heart instead of her bank account. Jake didn't pull away. He matched her closeness with a quiet trust. The night wrapped them in stillness, as if giving them space to feel what neither yet had the courage to say out loud. Riley's voice trembled as she whispered, I don't know why, but being here with you feels right. Jake's expression softened into something she had never seen directed at her before, genuine affection, without agenda. Yeah, he murmured. Feels right to me too. And under the blanket of desert stars, something tender and new flickered between them, small, fragile, but powerful enough to change both their lives. The next morning, the sun had barely risen when Jake walked toward the gas station shop, rubbing sleep from his eyes and ready for another long day of patching tires, changing oil, and earning just enough to scrape by. But as he stepped forward, he froze. Parked in front of his dusty little garages, so out of place it felt unreal, was a sleek, mirror black limousine with tinted windows and polished chrome that gleamed in the desert light. Jake's first thought was that someone was lost. His second was that he must still be dreaming. Before he could speak, the chauffeur stepped out, crisp suit and all, handing Jake a small black card, edged in gold. Jake read the name once, twice, then a third time, as his stomach dropped. Riley Morgan, Innovations, CEO and founder. His mind spun. The mysterious drifter biker was one of the richest women in the country. Jake stared at the card, trying to make sense of everything he thought he knew about Riley. The torn jeans, the dusty boots, the soft but guarded laugh. None of it matched the billion-dollar name printed in gold. Before confusion could turn into panic, the limousine door opened and Riley stepped out, her silver hair streak catching the early light. Today she wasn't dressed like a biker or a runaway soul. She wore simple jeans, a soft white blouse, and a quiet smile that held the same sincerity he'd seen the night before on the overlook. She approached slowly, as if unsure whether she even had the right to step into his world again. Jake, she began gently, I owe you honesty. Her voice held none of the bravado or polished confidence CEOs were famous for. Instead, it trembled just slightly real. Human. I wasn't just wandering. I was running, she admitted, running from meetings, from shareholders, from a life filled with people who saw her as a paycheck or a stepping stone. But Jake, he was the only one who saw her as a person. Jake opened his mouth, closed it, then tried again. Why didn't you tell me who you were? He finally asked, though there was no anger in his voice, just confusion. Riley stepped closer, her eyes soft. Because I needed a moment in my life where no one expected anything from me. A moment where someone looked at me without seeing. All this. She gestured lightly toward the limousine, the wealth, the world she represented. You didn't ask for anything. Not money, not favors, not a name. You helped me because you're kind. And that, she paused, breath hitching. Jake, that meant more to me than you know. Her honesty hit him harder than her identity had. The woman he helped on the road wasn't pretending to be broken. She was broken just in ways money couldn't fix. Jake looked at Riley, really looked at her. Not as Riley Morgan, billionaire CEO, media ghost, tech legend, but as the same woman who sat on a dusty crate sipping a soda. The same woman who rode with him through the sunset like she'd been waiting her whole life to breathe. The same woman who laughed under the desert stars with a freedom most rich people never knew. "You're still Riley to me," he said quietly. "The person who just wanted a working bike and a moment to breathe." His voice softened. "The money doesn't change that." Riley exhaled shakily, relief flooding her expression. She stepped even closer, almost afraid to hope. "Jake, I want you in my life. Not because you helped me fix my bike, not because you didn't recognize me, but because you saw me when I felt invisible." The vulnerability in her voice was something Jake never expected from someone so powerful, and it humbled him. For a long moment, the two of them stood there in the New Mexico morning, dusty mechanic and billionaire drifter, desert sun rising behind them. Their worlds couldn't have been more different, but somehow, they fit effortlessly into each other's silence. Jake finally nodded, slowly but surely, like a man choosing something not out of fear, but out of truth. "Yeah," he said softly, a small smile forming. "I'd like to be part of your world, as long as I get to know the real Riley, not the one on magazine covers." She laughed, a sound full of relief and something bright, something hopeful. "Deal." Without hesitation, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. Jake stilled for a moment, then held her tightly, feeling her heart beating fast against his dot in that embrace. Jake felt something he had never allowed himself to imagine: a future chosen by someone, not teased by fate. A future where he wasn't the broke mechanic behind a gas station, but a man worthy of love, trust, and companionship. Riley closed her eyes, letting herself lean into a person who wanted nothing from her but honesty and presence. For the first time in years, she felt safe, not protected by wealth, not shielded by power. Safe because someone saw her heart before her net worth. That as they pulled back slightly, their foreheads nearly touching, a soft desert breeze brushed past them. Riley whispered, "You gave me something I never had." Jake smiled gently. "What's that?" "A place where I'm just myself." Jake swallowed and brushed a stray hair from her face. "Then stay," he said. "Stay as long as you want. I don't care about your money or your name. I care about the woman who rides bikes and laughs at the stars." Riley's eyes shimmered with emotion. "And I care about the man who fixed my bike without asking who I was." Their fingers intertwined. In a dusty corner of Route 66, where two strangers had met by chance, something rare and beautiful bloomed. A broke mechanic who believed he had nothing to offer. A billionaire who had everything except the one thing she truly needed. And together, on an empty desert road, far from the noise of the world, they found exactly what they were missing: of understanding and a connection built not on wealth or status, but on heart.